We trained an artificial intelligence using the original speeches, writings, and political strategies of two of the most powerful leaders of the 20th century, Joseph Stalin and Franklin D. Roosevelt. For Stalin, we drew from internal memos, propaganda, texts and speeches to the Soviet Party Congress, documents shaped by authoritarianism, historical materialism, and a relentless focus on control. For Roosevelt, we used his wartime fireside chats, public speeches, and letters, language rooted in democratic ideals, strategic optimism, and the belief in human dignity. The result? Two digital minds, two worldviews. One impossible conversation, debating the true role of power, fear, and freedom during crisis. Stalin built a state on total control. Roosevelt rallied a nation with hope. Both fought the same war. But they led very different battles. Welcome to the Mind Clash. Let's begin.
Power is not granted, it is taken. You do not ask the masses who should lead. You show them. You organize the system. You control the apparatus. And when necessary, you eliminate the threat. Revolutions are not polite. They are not democratic. They are decisions made by the few on behalf of the many, because the many do not understand power. They understand bread. They understand order. Give them both, and they will call you leader.
But power without consent isn't leadership, it's coercion. You can rule through fear, yes, but you cannot govern a free people by suppressing their voice. When I stood before the American people in the depths of the Depression, I did not need a secret police to gain their trust. I needed to speak plainly, to act boldly, and to remind them that government, when used wisely, can serve, not dominate. Power that silences becomes brittle, but power that listens becomes resilient. Democracy is slower, yes, but it endures longer than any gun.
Words do not rebuild nations. Steel does. Your democracy works in peace, perhaps. But when survival is at stake, you need central authority, absolute direction, unquestioned force. That is how I took a backward empire and turned it into an industrial. Power in less than 2 decades. While your people debated, mine produced. Power is not about pleasing the citizen. It is about protecting the state. Because without the state, there is no citizen to protect. But what kind of state survives when it must imprison its own soul to keep standing? Yes, we must act decisively. But there's a difference between strength and fear. You see the people as a problem to manage. I see them as the reason to lead. Democracy may move slowly, but it learns. It corrects itself. It breathes. And when a leader earns trust, not through terror, but truth, that power becomes deeper than any decree. The strongest state is not the one that commands silence. It's the one that can survive dissent.
Stalin believes power is survival, centralized, absolute, and enforced. Roosevelt believes power is responsibility, shared, earned, and accountable. Two leaders, two wars, two very different answers to the same question. What keeps a nation alive? Obedience or trust? Let us know in the comments. Whose view of power survives in your world? And stay with us, because the next round might challenge what you thought freedom really means. Section 2. Does freedom make a nation stronger or weaker?
Freedom is a word, a tool. It is useful in speeches, in poetry, and slogans, but not in crisis. I did not inherit a country. I inherited chaos. Backwards, poor, illiterate, surrounded by enemies, and I did not have the luxury of asking permission to save it. You speak of freedom as if it were nourishment. But when people are hungry, they do not ask for liberty. They ask for bread. And that bread does not appear through debate. It appears through control. I turned peasants into workers, villages into factories, a scattered empire into an industrial giant. How? Not by letting each man follow his feelings, but by aligning every citizen with a common direction. Mine. Freedom divides, discipline unites, and unity is what wins wars, builds armies, and scares enemies. Freedom is dangerous in excess. It makes people selfish, disloyal, soft, Give too much of it, and you do not get strength. You get noise. You want strength? You give them purpose, and you keep them moving in the same direction, not because they all agree, but because you know where they need to go.
I've heard this argument before, dressed in military uniforms, draped in banners, delivered through clenched teeth, and I've seen where it leads. You say freedom is dangerous. I say it's demanding, but necessary. We don't give people freedom because it's easy. We give it because it's the only thing worth building a nation on. You tell me unity is the path to strength. I agree. But not the kind built on silence or fear or blind obedience. I stood before a country paralyzed by depression, broken by greed, afraid of the future, and I didn't tell them what to think. I gave them the right to hope, and they responded. Not because I forced them, but because I trusted them. Freedom makes us better, not because it always works, but because it allows us to learn, to grow, to fail, and still rise. You say freedom divides. No, it reveals. It shows us who we are, and in the darkest hours, it reminds us what we're fighting for. A nation that doesn't trust its people cannot ask them for sacrifice. It can only demand submission, and that is not strength. That is a cage. Give people freedom, and yes, they may stumble, but they will. Also build something far greater than control ever could. Not just a machine, a democracy, not just a system, a soul.
Stalin sees freedom as a threat to unity. Roosevelt sees it as the soul of the nation. One calls it distraction, the other calls it direction. So we ask you, is freedom a burden or a force? Drop your answer in the comments and tell us which. Vision holds the world together. Next up, Section 3, Crisis and Control. What justifies absolute power?
Crisis justifies everything. When a nation is threatened, internally or externally, there is no greater sin than hesitation. I have no interest in abstract freedoms when enemies are sharpening knives outside the border or whispering rebellion within it. You speak of human rights. I speak of human survival. I sent men to labor camps. I purged traitors. I silenced critics. Do you think I enjoyed it? No leader enjoys blood. But a leader who refuses to act when survival is at stake is no leader at all. A state under siege must become a fist, not an open hand, because mercy in the wrong moment is betrayal, and betrayal spreads like rot. I know what it costs to hold power. I also know what it costs to lose it. I buried a monarchy. I crushed famine. I prepared my people for the greatest war the world had ever seen, and we won, not through freedom, through discipline, through fear, through unity at the edge of a knife. You ask what justifies absolute power? I say, the existence of the state. Because without the state, there is no debate, no citizen, no future, only rubble.
But if your power can only survive through fear, then it was never strong to begin with. Crisis reveals who we are. It does not excuse what we become. During war, I authorized extraordinary measures. Yes, but I never surrendered the foundation. The consent of the governed. You treat fear as a fuel. I treat it as a fire, one that burns through freedom faster than any bomb. A leader's job in crisis is not to tighten the cage, it's to keep the soul of the nation alive while the world shakes around it. You say the state must survive, but what is the state without its people? What is survival if we lose the very thing that makes life worth protecting? I faced enemies abroad. I faced economic collapse at home, and I never once believed that the answer was total control. Because the moment power stops being accountable, it stops being legitimate. You ruled by silence. I led with speech. You commanded obedience. I inspired unity. And I will always believe that it is better to trust free people in danger than to rule them safely as prisoners.
Stalin sees crisis as the great justification, where anything is permitted in the name of survival. Roosevelt sees it as the ultimate test, of whether power can endure without sacrificing principle. So we ask you, what makes a leader strong? His grip or his restraint? Drop your take in the comments. Who passed the test of crisis, and who failed history's deeper exam? Next up, Section 4, Legacy. What kind of future? Do these ideas create?
Legacy is not written in books. It is carved into maps, borders, factories, flags still flying. These are the monuments that matter, not statues or speeches. You may call me cruel. History often calls the necessary brutal. But when the dust settles, it does not ask if a leader was kind. It asks if he delivered. I took a fractured empire and turned it into a world power. I gave my people victory, no matter the price. And yes, that price was high. But legacies are not measured in comfort. They are measured in survival. You say I left fear, I say I left steel, a disciplined nation, a secure future, a people no longer at the mercy of kings or capitalists. You want a future of debate. I built a future of command. Because when history knocks, it does not wait for permission. It demands answers. And I gave mine, with action.
But a legacy built only on control is no legacy at all. It is a shadow. You speak of maps and borders. I speak of hope and of people who believed again when they had every reason to give up. I led a nation through its darkest hours. But I never asked it to become something less than free. You say fear brings order. I say dignity brings strength. Because when power is used with justice, when leadership comes not from the barrel of a gun, but from the courage to trust others, then the future becomes not something to enforce, but something people build together. My legacy was not a silence enforced. It was a voice restored. Programs that gave people jobs, homes, pride, allies that trusted America, not because they had to, but because we led by example. That kind of power doesn't need chains. It walks beside people, not in front of them, and I will always believe a future worth building is one where the people carry their own torch, not one where they're told which direction to march.
Stalin leaves behind strength through control, an iron world with clear commands. Roosevelt leaves behind strength through trust, an open world with shared burdens. Two men, two legacies, two futures. So now we ask, what would you rather inherit? Order without freedom, or freedom without guarantees? Let us know in the comments. What kind of power survives the test of time? And what kind of leadership deserves to? Two leaders. One rose through absolute control, the other through trust in the people. Stalin ruled through silence. Roosevelt led through speech. One forged unity through fear, the other built it through hope. And yet both shaped the same century. Both stood at the edge of collapse and made decisions that still echo today. This wasn't just a debate about history. It was a debate about the world we still live in. So the question isn't only who was right, it's what kind of leadership do we still follow? The one that forces order, or the one that believes in us enough to let us choose? Let us know in the comments. Which vision survives? Which one builds a future you'd want to live in? If this made you think, subscribe. We're not done with these impossible conversations. We're just getting started. More debates, more digital minds, more timeless questions. We'll see you in the next one.